fog rolled across the Thames like a living thing, swallowing the gas lamps one by one, when the cry shattered the night outside Wycliffe Manor. A man, wealthy financier Alistair Grant, was found collapsed on the marble steps, his final breath spent on a single trembling whisper. He lied. Within the hour, Hercule Poirot arrived, moustaches immaculate despite the weather, eyes glittering with quiet calculation. For beneath the thin veil of tragedy lay a deeper puzzle. Everyone inside the manor had something to hide, and each would offer an answer. But only one answer, Poirot suspected, would explain a dying man's final word. Chapter 1. The cry on the steps. Inside the manor, a dinner had ended not even an hour earlier. Servants still moved quietly through the hallways, gathering linens and extinguishing candles. The guests, 4 in total, remained somewhere within, though none seemed willing to appear. A strange heaviness hung in the air, the sort of tight, breathless expectancy that precedes disaster. But disaster had already come. It waited now, only to be discovered. It happened at 11:06 p.m. A cry, high, cracking, desperate, tore through the fog like a blade. A constable on his night round turned sharply toward the manor, boots splashing against wet stone. A footman, startled inside the front hall, dropped the silver tray he had been polishing, and a single chandelier in the drawing-room trembled ever so slightly, as though even the crystal understood that something irrevocable had taken place. Moments later, the front door flew open with a burst of cold air, and a woman in a satin evening gown stepped out onto the marble steps. Her silhouette, the elegant sweep of her shoulders, the lace shawl fluttering like a moth's wings, was unmistakable. Lady Evelyn Grant, wife of the financier Alistair Grant, stood frozen, one hand pressed to her mouth as she looked down at the figure sprawled at her feet. Her husband, unmoving, face tilted toward the gas lamp above the door. Eyes wide with a terror they would never again blink away. "Alistair, Alistair, please, say something, say anything at all," she whispered, voice cracking as she knelt. Her breath misted in the freezing air. A thin drizzle had begun to fall, dappling her gown in silver droplets. She reached for his hand, recoiled at its coldness, then forced herself to touch it again with trembling fingers. For a moment, she thought she had imagined it, yet no. His lips moved, barely. A whisper drifted up like a ghost. "He lied!" Lady Evelyn staggered backward, staring. "Who, Alistair? Who lied?" But he exhaled sharply, painfully, and then nothing. No breath, no sound, only the relentless whisper of fog rolling across stone. When Hercule Poirot arrived, it was precisely 11:23 p.m. The motor car carrying him cut through the fog like a black arrow, its lamps glowing faintly golden. Poirot stepped out, adjusting the impeccable cuffs of his coat as his polished shoes met the pavement. The detective's moustaches, carefully waxed, curved with military discipline, gleamed even in the muted light. He paused to survey the mansion, head slightly tilted, eyes sharp. Always, always, it was the details. And already, the details whispered a story. A constable hurried over. "Mr. Poirot, sir, we sent for you at once. A death, strange circumstances. The lady insisted it could not be natural." Poirot nodded, gaze moving swiftly to the body still lying at the foot of the steps. "You have preserved the scene? No one has touched the gentleman?" "Only checked for a pulse, sir. And Lady Grant. She was beside him when we arrived." Poirot took out a pair of delicate gloves, pulling them on with meticulous care. "Très bien. Lead me to him." As he approached, he heard Lady Evelyn's soft sobs behind a handkerchief. A maid stood beside her, murmuring helplessly. The detective inclined his head politely, but did not yet speak to her. He knelt by Alistair Grant's form. The marble beneath the victim's back was slick with rain and dew, not blood. No wound was visible, no sign of struggle. Grant's expression remained locked in that terrible final moment. Fear, disbelief, and something else. Betrayal. Poirot gently lifted one eyelid, then the other. The pupils, they do not react as expected, but there is a faint, very faint discoloration. He sniffed very lightly near the man's lips. And a trace, yes, faint but unmistakable. The bitterness of almonds. The constable stiffened. You mean? Poirot held up a hand. I mean only that the gentleman may have encountered something of chemical nature. But I do not leap, I do not assume, I observe. His gaze drifted downward. A small, shining object lay half hidden against the bottom step. Poirot retrieved it carefully between thumb and forefinger. A cufflink, gold, finely engraved, but with no initials. Poirot turned it over twice, eyes narrowing. Curious. He placed it in a small envelope and rose elegantly. Come, Inspector Gray, let us speak with the lady. Lady Evelyn looked up as the two men approached. Her face, framed by soft chestnut curls, was pale as china. Monsieur Poirot, she whispered, voice shaking, please tell me what happened to my husband. Poirot bowed slightly. Madame, I will tell you what I can, though at this moment the puzzle is but newly begun. But I must ask, you heard him speak? Her hands trembled. Yes, I think so. He said something, a word, two perhaps, but She hesitated. Poirot leaned in gently. If you please, madame, it may be of importance. Her eyes filled. He said. He lied. Poirot's gaze flickered, just slightly, toward the massive front door. And who, madame, would this he be? She swallowed. I don't know. Poirot knew a lie when he heard one, but he did not call it out. Not yet. Inside Wycliffe Manor, the air was warmer but no less heavy. Chandeliers cast muted halos across polished oak floors. The drawing room, where the guests from the dinner still lingered, felt strangely claustrophobic, as though the fog were pressing against the windows trying to enter. 4 people awaited him. 4 pairs of eyes watching. 4 possible reactions. Poirot stepped inside with quiet authority, Inspector Gray at his side. On the far end, standing rigidly near the fireplace, was Jonathan Hale, Grant's secretary, a thin, nervous man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. His posture was that of someone used to standing, used to waiting, used to being ignored. But now his hands twisted together anxiously. To the right, perched on a velvet chair like a restless bird, sat Clara Morton, the victim's niece. Early 20s, sharp jawline, sharper eyes. She wore a dress too modern for the manner, and an expression too defiant for the moment. Near a side table, pouring himself a second drink with hands that did not tremble, stood Dr. Felix Armand, the family physician. Tall, striking, a calmness bordering on cold calculation. And finally, near the window, pacing slowly with a rigid elegance, Lady Evelyn rejoined the group, refusing a servant's offer of tea with a small shake of her head. Poirot addressed them all. Mesdames, Messieurs, if you please, I am Hercule Poirot, and I am told that you were each present for a private dinner this evening with Monsieur Grant. Now, he is dead. His final words suggest betrayal. And so I must ask questions. Many questions. No one moved. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. Let us begin with the simplest. Tell me, each of you, where you were at the time Monsieur Grant stepped out onto the front steps. Jonathan cleared his throat first. I had gone to the study, Monsieur Poirot. Mr. Grant asked me to fetch certain documents. Poirot nodded slowly. Alone? Yes. He turned to Clara. I was in the music room. The argument between Uncle and Lady Evelyn had upset me, so I left the table. Lady Evelyn stiffened. Poirot stored that reaction away. And you, madame? He asked her. She inhaled shakily. In my room. I needed a moment. Alistair, he spoke to me unkindly at dinner. I left abruptly. Poirot examined her expression, controlled but fragile. And doctor? Armand took a leisurely sip of his drink. I remained in the drawing room. Mr. Grant had asked me to stay near, as he had been feeling unwell for days. I saw him stand and leave the dining room, but nothing more. Poirot nodded, then walked slowly across the room, studying the furniture, the untouched plates, the decanter of wine whose glass stopper lay crookedly on the table. You all speak as though the dinner ended peacefully, Poirot murmured, but I observe tension, fear, and secrets clutched very near the heart. Clara scoffed. Everyone keeps secrets in this house, monsieur. Poirot turned sharply. But only one kills for them, mademoiselle. She went silent. He crossed to the dining table, examining the glasses. 6 places were set, 4 used. One glass here has cracks at the base. The other is completely untouched. Why? Jonathan swallowed. That would be the glass set for Mr. Hale. I didn't drink wine. I had headaches. Poirot moved the glass gently. Wiped. Recently. Even the stem. Jonathan's breath stuttered. I dropped it earlier. My hand slipped. I didn't wish to appear clumsy during dinner, so I cleaned it. Poirot raised an eyebrow. A small clumsiness turns into a small deception, monsieur. It is interesting. I remember the words of Monsieur Grant as he lay dying. He lied. Perhaps, he spoke of this. Jonathan blanched visibly. Poirot stepped away and approached the door leading to the front steps. And this door, was it locked when Monsieur Grant stepped out? Lady Evelyn answered softly. No, he opened it himself. Poirot placed a gloved finger on the brass handle. Moisture from outside had left fine droplets along its surface, yet within those droplets was a smear, as if someone had gripped it hard. He made a mental note. Tell me, Poirot continued, turning back to them, how did Monsieur Grant seem during the dinner? Calm? Distracted? Angry? Silence. Then Clara. He was furious. Jonathan. He was nervous. Armand. He was ill. Evelyn. He was not himself at all. Poirot's eyes gleamed. 4 answers. 4 truths, or 4 evasions. He stepped closer to the fireplace, feeling the room's tension wrap around him like a tightening net. You see, mes amis, this is not a simple death. It is a death accompanied by a whisper of wrongdoing. A whisper of deceit. A whisper that one among you hides something very grave. Armand exhaled sharply. Poirot, surely you are not implying... Poirot raised a hand. I imply nothing, Doctor, not yet. But already, the scene tells me more than words. For instance, he reached into his pocket and withdrew the cufflink. This was found beside Monsieur Grant, not on him, not in his hand, beside him. The 4 suspects stared at it with varying degrees of controlled alarm. No initials, Poirot said softly. A peculiar choice for a wealthy gentleman. And yet one of you must recognize it, I think. Lady Evelyn's lips parted, then closed. Clara's eyes narrowed. Jonathan swallowed hard. Armand's brow twitched ever so slightly. Poirot observed every reaction with precision. And here is another interesting detail, Poirot continued. There was no sign of struggle on Monsieur Grant's body. Yet this cufflink appears to have been torn from a sleeve. Why? For what reason would he grasp another man's cuff? The silence deepened. Poirot's next words were spoken in a whisper. Unless he reached for his killer. Lady Evelyn gasped. Poirot stepped back, folding his hands behind him again. Tonight, mes amis, something happened at these steps. A conversation, heated perhaps, a confrontation, and a lie so significant that Monsieur Grant used his final breath to condemn it. His dark eyes scanned each face. "I will uncover that lie," he said quietly, "and the person who told it." A clock somewhere in the hall chimed midnight. The fog outside pressed harder against the windows, as though listening. Poirot turned toward the staircase. "For tonight, Inspector Gray, the body must remain in place, the grounds must be secured, and I will speak with each suspect alone." He paused at the bottom step. "But before that, I will examine the front steps once more." As he stepped outside into the wet, cold darkness, the fog curled around him like a serpent. He knelt where the body had lain moments ago, studying the faint scuff marks on the marble. He leaned so close, his moustaches brushed the stone. A struggle, yes, but subtle. Someone held him by the arm. Someone guided him here. His gaze fell on a single faint footprint, half washed by rain. Not Alistair Grant's, and not Lady Evelyn's satin slippers. A man's boot, slightly squared at the toe. Poirot straightened slowly. Ah, so there was someone with him. And then he saw it. Another small object, nearly invisible against the wet marble. He picked it up, eyes widening with interest, a fragment of paper, torn, smudged with ink, not belonging to Alistair Grant, and not belonging to anyone who intended it to be found. Poirot held it delicately. "Oh," he murmured, "this night becomes more interesting by the minute." He turned toward the house, where 4 shadows waited in dread behind glowing windows. "Someone," Hercule Poirot whispered to himself, "came to speak with Alistair Grant tonight. Someone who fears the truth. Someone whose lie is worth killing for." The fog swallowed his words as he stepped back into the house to begin the first of many interrogations. Chapter 2. The Dinner That Should Not Have Happened. The dining room of Wycliffe Manor looked deceptively serene the morning after the tragedy. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, dappling the long mahogany table with bright, harmless patches of gold. But Hercule Poirot had always distrusted the calm of the morning. Night, with its shadows and secrets, often left traces that daylight could not completely banish. The dining room was such a place. Beneath its polished veneer lay the residue of tension, sharp words, and intentions concealed behind polite smiles. It was, in Poirot's view, a battlefield disguised as an elegant room. He stood in the doorway for a moment, hands clasped behind him, allowing his sharp eyes to absorb the scene. The table was still set as it had been during dinner, save for the spots disturbed by servants who had been too shaken to clear it properly. 6 chairs, 2 at the heads, 4 along the sides, empty wine glasses, silverware aligned with near-military precision. A decanter of red wine that caught the sunlight and burned ruby. Nothing out of place, and yet everything wrong. "Inspector Gray," Poirot murmured, "before we begin our separate interviews, I wish to walk you through the events of last night. What happened here was no coincidence. Monsieur Grant did not collapse by an act of nature. This room holds secrets." Gray, still scribbling notes in a small leather-bound notebook, nodded. "Lady Evelyn says dinner began at 8. The niece, Clara, arrived slightly late. Dr. Armand remained throughout. The secretary came and went. Nothing unusual has surfaced yet." Poirot gave him a faint smile. "It is the word 'yet' that is important. Now, mon ami, note everything I do." He circled the table slowly, keen eyes following the trajectory of each chair. 6 places set, but only 5 individuals were present during the day. A 6th guest was expected. Gray blinked. A sixth guest? Poirot lifted a hand toward the untouched place setting. Immaculate, the water glass distanced from the edge, a single napkin folded into a precise swan shape. Observe, no fingerprints on the glass, no crumpling in the napkin, no disturbance of cutlery. Someone prepared this setting with care. And Monsieur Grant expected someone to fill it. Gray frowned. But who? That is the question. Poirot tapped a finger lightly against his cheek. Lady Evelyn claims she knew of no such additional guest. Clara, I suspect, will claim the same. Jonathan Hale may not have been informed. But the doctor, his composure is too perfect, and perfection, as I often say, is suspicious. He moved next to the decanter. This was used. 4 glasses show residue. 1, Jonathan's, was wiped. And the final one here is too full for someone who drank from it. Gray knelt to inspect the china. Armand swears no poison was used, says it was a heart attack. Poirot smiled thinly. Of course he says that. He is a doctor, and doctors, my friend, have access to many things that mimic nature. Gray went quiet. Poirot lifted the decanter and inhaled gently. Wine of a fine vintage, and yet, a strange bitterness clings to the rim. He set it down carefully. Someone tampered with this bottle, or one of the glasses, before dinner began. Gray scribbled furiously. But if poison was used, why was Grant able to leave the table? Why walk outside? Because the poison was not swift, at least not immediately, and because he expected someone. Poirot tapped the 6th place setting again. It is possible this mysterious guest did not join them inside. Perhaps the meeting occurred outside. Perhaps heated words were exchanged. A confrontation, yes. Gray looked toward the front hall. But who would meet him privately outside after dinner? Poirot's eyes glittered. Someone who wished to avoid being seen by the other guests. Someone whose presence was not meant to be known. Poirot took his seat at the head of the table, where Alistair Grant had presumably sat the night before. He allowed the room to settle around him, listening to the silence. In his mind he reconstructed the scene. Evelyn's icy dignity, Clara's restless defiance, Jonathan's nervous glances, Armand's polished smile. And at the centre, Alistair Grant, wealthy, powerful, feared, and evidently in possession of truths sharp enough to draw blood. Poirot needed to understand the emotional landscape of the dinner. He could not rely solely on factual details. Motives often lurked in the intangible: tension, tone, hesitation, the weight of unspoken words. And so he allowed himself to imagine. Clara arriving late, cheeks flushed, muttering an apology. Jonathan struggling to focus on the menu, knowing his job hung by a thread. Evelyn cold and distant, her eyes on the wine rather than her husband. Armand observing them all with the precision of a surgeon. And Alistair? Alistair would have surveyed them with the air of a man who enjoyed holding the strings. He had secrets on all of them. Of that Poirot was increasingly certain. "Inspector Gray," Poirot said quietly, "fetch me the servants who attended the dinner." Gray nodded and left the room. Poirot remained seated, lifting a single fork. The silver glimmered. A faint scratch marred the edge. Another small scratch lay near the knife. Poirot smiled. Tiny details, easily overlooked, but nothing was trivial. "Someone gripped these utensils more tightly than necessary," he murmured. "Someone was anxious." He placed them precisely back in place. Fear, anticipation, guilt, which one, I wonder? Footsteps approached. Gray returned with 2 servants, a young footman, Thomas, and the older housemaid, Martha. Both looked shaken. Poirot rose. "Please, sit. I require only your honest recollection of last night." Thomas, twisting his cap nervously, spoke first. "It was a quiet dinner mostly, sir. Quieter than usual. Mr. Grant seemed strange, like he had something heavy on his mind." Poirot nodded. "Did he speak much?" "No, sir. Barely ate. Kept glancing toward the door as if waiting." Poirot glanced at the sixth place setting. "And did Mr. Grant instruct you to set 6 places?" Thomas exchanged a glance with Martha. "Yes, sir. Said he expected a final guest, but no one came, at least not through the front door." Poirot's brows lifted. "Not through the front door." Martha leaned forward. "He asked me to keep the side door unlocked, the one near the garden. It wasn't like him, Mr. Poirot. He usually wants everything locked at night. But last evening he told me, 'Leave it open, the man will find his way.'" Poirot's eyes sharpened. "The man? He said those words?" "Yes, sir." Poirot clasped his hands. "Then it is as I suspected. The final guest did not join dinner. He arrived in secret, and the meeting occurred outside." Thomas swallowed. "But, sir, we heard something, near the end of dinner, raised voices." Poirot leaned in. "Whose?" Thomas hesitated. "Mr. Grant and another man, not Dr. Armand, not Mr. Hale, someone else." Poirot exchanged a quick look with Gray. "Describe the voice," Poirot requested gently. Thomas closed his eyes, reliving the sound. "Low, angry. The other man sounded frightened. No, not frightened. Nervous, like someone cornered." Poirot asked softly, "Did you hear any names?" Only Mr. Grant said something like, "You promised me the truth." And the other voice said, I told you what I could." Poirot's pulse quickened. A lie, a truth, a betrayal. And then Poirot pressed. Thomas swallowed. Then there was silence. Then the front door opened. Mr. Grant walked out alone. 10 minutes later, Lady Evelyn screamed. Poirot closed his eyes briefly, letting the information settle. "Merci," he said at last. "You may go. You have been most helpful." The servants retreated. Gray exhaled. So, someone met him outside. Someone who lied to him. Poirot paced slowly. Yes. And that man fled before the death was discovered. But perhaps he did not flee far. Perhaps he is still within these walls. Or perhaps one of our 4 guests knows exactly who he is. He turned back to the table. This dinner was not a friendly gathering. It was a stage upon which Monsieur Grant prepared to confront them all, or announce something significant. Poirot lifted the cracked wineglass. "This glass belongs to Lady Evelyn, a crack near the stem. Did she grip it too tightly in anger? Did she strike it against something, or did someone tamper with it?" He moved to Clara's glass. "Half full. Lipstick smudged. She drank quicker than she claims." Jonathan's place. Barely touched his food. Wiped his glass. Anxious. Dr. Armand. Drank most of his wine, but not enough to dull his precision. Poirot inhaled deeply. Yes, the room speaks if one listens. Gray leaned forward. "Poirot, what do you think happened during dinner?" Poirot's answer was slow and deliberate. "I believe that they were not 4 guests gathered to enjoy a meal, but 4 individuals summoned by Alistair Grant for very different reasons. I believe he intended to reveal something, or force someone's hand, and I believe that he expected the 6th guest to deliver a final piece of information." Gray's gaze drifted to the 6th place setting. But what information? Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. "The truth behind a lie." Poirot walked to the tall window overlooking the front steps. Outside, sunlight struggled to pierce the lingering fog. The marble steps still carried faint impressions of the previous night. Boot marks half erased by rain, the shoe smear where Grant had fallen, a small scratch in the stone where the cufflink had slid. Poirot traced the scratch with his gaze. Alistair Grant did not fall alone. He fell reaching for someone. Gray approached cautiously. The cufflink? Precisely. Someone stood close enough that Grant could grab him. Someone who was trying to pull away. Poirot folded his arms. I will reconstruct the steps of the dinner, mon ami, step by step. He began to pace. First, Grant invites 4 people he does not trust. Second, he expects a 5th, a secret guest who never joins the table. Third, during dinner, tension builds. Words are exchanged, possibly threats. Fourth, Grant receives or confronts new information. Fifth, he leaves abruptly to meet the secret guest outside. Sixth, only one voice is heard arguing with him. Seventh, Grant collapses and dies. Eighth, his last words, he lied. Poirot stopped pacing. His eyes glinted. Every step tells a story. Gray cleared his throat. Which step do we focus on first? Poirot turned slowly. The lie. The word he used was not random. He could have said help. He could have said Evelyn. He could have said pain. But he chose lied. This means that his final thought, his final certainty, was that he had been deceived. The question is, about what? Poirot looked again at the 6th place setting. And by whom? He stepped closer, examining the placement of the napkin. Something caught his eye. Something so minute that most would have dismissed it as a quirk of shadow. A faint indentation on the napkin's edge. A thin, straight line, imprinted as if by a pen or pencil, barely noticeable. Poirot lifted it delicately. A writing instrument rested here. Someone intended to sit and write, or to read something written. Gray blinked. A note? Perhaps a confession, a demand, a bargain, or a threat. Poirot felt a sudden tightening in his chest. Not fear, but anticipation. Someone left a message for Monsieur Grant, or someone expected one. He placed the napkin down carefully and turned back to Gray. Fetch Jonathan Hale. I wish to question him first. Gray nodded and stepped out. Poirot stood alone in the dining room again, studying the polished surface of the table where 4 suspects had sat like actors on a stage, each performing a role, each hiding something. He whispered to himself, the dinner was the beginning. The truth began to unravel the moment they sat down, and now it is my task to pull the thread. He touched the 6th place setting once more. And someone, Poirot murmured, intended to join them. Someone whose absence changed everything. The room remained silent, but Poirot felt the weight of its secrets pressing in on him like the fog outside. Very well, he said quietly. Let us uncover the truth, one lie at a time. Chapter 3. Shadows Beneath the Silk. The morning after. Charles Harrowmont's death dawned pale, washed in the kind of dim winter light that gave Enderby Estate the appearance of a house suspended between waking and dream. A soft, colourless world where every shadow seemed longer than it should have been. Hercule Poirot, freshly attired in his immaculate grey suit and polished shoes, stood before the great central staircase, tapping the tip of his cane lightly against the marble, as he surveyed the quiet chaos of a household in mourning. Yet beneath the sombre atmosphere, Poirot sensed a tremor, something restless, concealed, desperate. He saw it first in the servants, who moved about with lowered eyes, whispering in fragmented sentences, as though fearful that speech itself might summon catastrophe. Then in Lady Eleanor Harrowmont, whose impeccable posture was betrayed by a slight tremor in her hands, as she attempted to pour tea in the morning room. And finally, in the unmistakable tension threaded through the corridors themselves, walls that had heard too much and wished to hear no more. Poirot accepted a cup of tea from Lady Eleanor and set it gently on the table, though he had no intention of drinking it. His attention was fixed on her eyes, intelligent, composed, but bearing a flicker of conflict that betrayed a truth she had not yet voiced. "My dear Lady Harrowmont," Poirot began softly, "last night you mentioned that your husband was troubled. You will forgive me for pressing the matter once again, but the mind that hesitates often knows more than it fears to say." Eleanor exhaled slowly, her gaze drifting toward the frost-blurred window. Charles became distant these past few weeks, withdrawn. He spent hours alone in his study, and he refused to discuss the documents he was reviewing. I had never seen him so unsettled. Poirot leaned forward slightly. "And did he ever reveal the nature of that which troubled him?" "No," she said. "Only that someone had approached him with information. Something he called dangerous knowledge, though he never told me what it meant." Poirot placed his fingertips together. "Information that may have led to his death." Her silence served as confirmation. The door creaked gently as Diana Harrowmont entered the room, her red hair braided neatly over one shoulder. Her composed expression was betrayed by her swollen eyes. She had not slept. Without waiting for permission, she crossed to the window and stood stiffly, her back to them. Poirot approached her carefully. "Mademoiselle, forgive my intrusion upon your grief, but there is something you said last night, something that troubles me. You insisted you had seen your father alive no later than 10:30. Diana nodded, still facing the window. "He was in the library. He looked exhausted, but he was alive. I even told him he should retire early." She paused. "I never imagined it would be the last conversation I'd have with him." Poirot examined the reflection of her face in the window. There was sorrow, yes, but not the frantic anxiety of a daughter concealing direct guilt. No, her secret was of a different nature. "And after this conversation," Poirot asked quietly, "I went to my room. I stayed there the rest of the night." She swallowed. "Alone?" Poirot said nothing, though he sensed her statement was half-truth. Diana turned then, folding her arms as if bracing against the cold. "Inspector Graves believes this was suicide. But you saw the body, Monsieur Poirot. You saw the room. You know that isn't true." Poirot bowed his head slightly. "Indeed, a man does not shoot himself at such an angle, and certainly not with gloves on." Eleanor inhaled sharply. "Gloves?" Poirot nodded. "Oui, madame. The late Mr. Harrowmont was wearing gloves, thin leather, elegant, a curious choice for a man supposedly taking his own life." Eleanor sank into her chair, visibly shaken. "Then someone placed the gun in his hand," Diana whispered. "Just so," Poirot replied. He moved to the fireplace where Charles Harrowmont's portrait hung. The man's expression stern, authoritative, clever. A man accustomed to power. A man who undoubtedly possessed the kind of knowledge that would tempt others into sin. Poirot murmured to himself, a crime committed not in passion, but with intention. As he studied the painting, a faint rustle came from the doorway. It was Lionel Graves, towering and grim as ever, his dark coat draped like shadow across his shoulders. "Poirot," he said in a clipped tone, "a word." Poirot followed him into the hall. "We found something," Graves said. "Not much, but enough to raise questions." He revealed a sealed evidence envelope containing a small piece of silk, deep blue, torn, and smelling faintly of perfume. "Found near the study window." Poirot examined the silk fragment, his brows lifting. "This is of good quality, expensive, belonging perhaps to a dress or scarf." Graves grunted. Or someone who climbed in. Poirot shook his head. Non, mon ami. The window was locked from within. This was left by someone inside the house. He returned the evidence to Graves and tapped his cane lightly on the floor. Tell me, Inspector, did you question the guests who attended the dinner last night? Of course. All of them claimed to have retired to their rooms before 11. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, yes, but the truth in such statements often lies not in what is said, but in how carefully it is rehearsed. Graves frowned. Poirot, are you implying the killer is still here, walking the halls like nothing happened? Poirot's voice grew soft. I am implying, Inspector, that the killer is among those who knew Charles Harrowmont intimately. Someone who understood what he had learned. Someone who feared exposure. He paused. Someone who possesses a garment of fine blue silk. A long silence stretched between them. Then Graves muttered, You believe this was personal? Poirot's gaze darkened. No, Inspector. I believe this was inevitable. He turned back toward the morning room, observing the two women, Eleanor, composed but trembling, Diana, haunted and sharp like broken glass. And somewhere in the estate, perhaps pacing in a guest room or whispering in a corridor, there was another presence, the one Poirot had yet to meet, the one whose silence spoke louder than any alibi. Poirot murmured to himself, one must always look for the pattern beneath the obvious. And as he stood in the great hall of Enderby Estate, surrounded by echoes of privilege and deceit, Hercule Poirot realized that Charles Harrowmont had not merely been killed. He had been silenced, and whatever secret he carried had not died with him. Chapter 4. The Guest Wing Whispers. The corridors of Enderby Estate seemed to breathe as Hercule Poirot made his way toward the guest wing, each step echoing softly against the polished wooden floor. Morning light filtered through narrow windows in pale, wavering slants, illuminating dust motes that drifted like silent witnesses to the estate's unspoken tensions. Poirot moved slowly, his cane tapping lightly in rhythm with his thoughts. For this was the hour when secrets tended to quiver nearest the surface, before their owners had fully composed their morning masks. It was in this wing that the late Charles Harrowmont had housed his closest acquaintances during the dinner gathering the night before. Poirot suspected that among these refined visitors, dressed in silk and respectability, lurked the shadow responsible for Harrowmont's death. And so he began, not with accusations, but with gentle prodding, like a surgeon seeking the exact place where the flesh flinches. The first room he approached belonged to Sir Reginald Blake, a robust man with silvering hair and the air of one accustomed to commanding attention. Poirot knocked. After a brief pause, Blake opened the door, his robe impeccably tied, his expression firm but uneasy. "Sir Reginald," Poirot greeted with a courteous bow, "may I intrude upon your morning for a few small questions?" Blake hesitated, then stepped aside. "If we must, monsieur, though I assure you, I have nothing to do with this dreadful business." Poirot entered, immediately noting the faint scent of expensive tobacco and the disorder of the room. A man who lived in comfort, but not meticulousness. On the armchair lay a dark overcoat, its sleeves slightly torn, though not in the manner of the blue silk he had discovered. Poirot stood by the window surveying the frosted gardens below. "You were one of the last to speak to Mr. Harrowmont last evening, I believe?" Blake nodded. "We exchanged a brief word after dinner. He seemed troubled, preoccupied, but Charles was often as such when dealing with affairs of finance. Nothing unusual." Poirot's eyebrows rose. Ish, gently. And yet you did not inquire. Blake shrugged. It wasn't my place. Charles valued his privacy. Poirot observed him carefully. The man's voice was steady, but his fingers twitched faintly, a sign of anxiety poorly hidden. And your whereabouts after 10 o'clock? In my room, Blake replied too quickly. I went to bed early. Poirot said nothing, but the hurried tone imprinted itself upon his mind. Leaving Sir Reginald, he moved to the next room, belonging to Madame Celeste Marchand, a French socialite adorned in elegance and mystery. When she opened the door, a delicate perfume drifted into the corridor. Rich, floral, unmistakably expensive. Poirot's mind immediately aligned it with the scent lingering on the blue silk fragment. Monsieur Poirot, she purred, eyes half-lidded with theatrical sorrow. You come to question me, yes? Poirot inclined his head. If Madame will indulge me. Her room was immaculate, far too impeccable, as though cleaned not by housemaids, but by someone erasing traces of themselves. A scarf lay draped over the back of a chair, crimson, not blue. Yet Poirot noticed something else. A jewellery case left slightly ajar, and inside it a space where a necklace might once have rested. Madame, Poirot began softly, did you know Mr. Harrowmont well? Celeste's expression flickered. Well, no. He was charming, certainly, and generous, but reserved. He was a man who carried shadows with him. Poirot studied her, noting the measured cadence of her words. And last night? I retired early, she replied smoothly, before the storm began. Poirot's gaze narrowed. Storm? She froze for a fraction of a second. There was no storm, madame. Her smile faltered, then returned with forced brightness. Perhaps I misremember. It was a long night. Poirot made no comment. Her lie was noted, not damning, but intriguing. He moved on. The final guest room belonged to Arthur Whitcomb, a quiet, bookish man with spectacles too large for his slender face. When Poirot entered, he found Whitcomb hunched over a notebook, scribbling furiously as though attempting to capture thoughts before they evaporated. Ah, Monsieur Poirot, Whitcomb exclaimed. You startled me. Poirot nodded toward the notebook. Research, Monsieur Whitcomb? Oh, just reflections, he stammered. Yesterday was unsettling. Poirot examined him with keen interest. Whitcomb lacked the composure of the other seats. He was nervous, jittery, but in a manner that suggested fear rather than guilt. Did Mr. Harrowmont speak to you last night? Poirot asked. Whitcomb swallowed. Yes, briefly. He asked me if I believed people could change. If a man burdened by wrongdoing could ever seek redemption. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Wrongdoing? Did he elaborate? No, he seemed distressed, and then someone called him away. Who? Poirot pressed. Whitcomb hesitated before whispering, Lady Eleanor. Poirot's breath stilled, not in shock, but in acknowledgement of a new thread pulling taut. And after that, he asked, I went to my room. I didn't leave. Poirot nodded, though his attention was already drifting, not to Whitcomb's trembling voice, but to a small detail. A smear of blue ink on the man's cuff. Not silk, but the right colour. Still, Poirot sensed Whitcomb's fear was genuine. When he returned to the main corridor, Poirot paused 3 guests, 3 conflicting accounts, 3 potential motives, yet none complete. He leaned lightly against his cane. Sir Reginald, money, tension, a torn coat. Madame Celeste, perfume matching the silk fragment, a lie, and a missing piece of jewellery. Whitcomb, fear, cryptic words from Harrowmont, and a name whispered with dread, Lady Eleanor's. Poirot murmured to himself, each thread must be tugged, but gently, gently. He walked toward the stairwell, mind swirling with deductions forming like constellations in darkness. He felt the pattern beginning to emerge, faint, incomplete, but unmistakably there. But as he descended toward the ground floor, a faint sound drifted from behind him. A soft creak, like a door closing slowly, deliberately. Poirot turned sharply, eyes narrowing. A figure had been watching him from the shadows of the guest wing. A figure who slipped away the moment his eyes lifted. Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. The killer grows restless. Chapter 5. The Silent Study. The study where Charles Harrowmont had met his end felt colder than the rest of Enderby Estate, as though death had left a lingering chill in the air that no fire could dispel. When Hercule Poirot entered the room once more, he paused on the threshold, allowing his senses to absorb every detail before he crossed the space. Morning light filtered weakly through the tall windows, illuminating the desk where Harrowmont had spent his final hours. Its surface still scattered with papers, some meticulously arranged, others left hastily in disarray. To Poirot, the room did not simply hold objects, it held intentions. Inspector Graves stood near the bookshelf, arms folded, attempting to project confidence, but revealing subtle irritation. "Back again, Poirot," he said. "I thought you'd finished here." Poirot shook his head. "Non, mon ami. A room of death must be allowed to speak, and one must listen carefully. Yesterday, it spoke only in whispers. Today, perhaps it will speak louder." He moved slowly toward the writing desk, careful not to disturb a single item. His gaze traveled to the small brass lamp, tipped slightly to one side. A sign of a struggle, or placed with deliberate imprecision to mimic one. Poirot's eyebrows arched. "Tell me, Inspector, were these papers in such disorder last night?" Graves replied, "Hard to say. The butler mentioned he tidied the edges when he found the body. Thought it inappropriate, you see, even in a crime scene." Poirot winced. Mon Dieu! A man tidying papers at such a moment may feel compelled by habit, but his habit has erased a truth. His fingers hovered over a loose bundle of documents tied with a thin cord. Still, not all is lost. He untied the cord, revealing letters addressed to Charles Harrowmont, many marked with a distinctive crest, a falcon in mid-flight. Poirot recognized it immediately. "Ah, this emblem belongs to the Falconbridge Investment Society, a place of great wealth and greater secrecy." Graves stepped closer. "Think this has something to do with Harrowmont's death?" Poirot lifted one document. The numbers were complex, investment figures, transfers, some unusual withdrawals, all carefully noted in Harrowmont's precise handwriting. Charles Harrowmont was chasing something, or someone, and he was close to discovering it. His gaze darkened, close enough for someone to silence him. He turned to the bookshelf, where volumes on finance, history, and politics lined the shelves in uniform precision. But one book stood out, a thin volume pulled only halfway back into place. Poirot gently removed it. Inside, instead of pages, lay a hidden envelope. It bore no name, no seal, only a single phrase written in firm, deliberate strokes. "He knows." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "This, Inspector Graves, is not merely a message, it is a threat." Graves exhaled sharply. "So Harrowmont was warned." Poirot nodded. "Oui. And what does a man do when warned? He either runs, or he prepares. Charles Harrowmont was not a man who ran." He surveyed the room again, but with renewed perspective. The tipped lamp, the gloves on Harrowmont's hands, the locked window, the staged pistol. A puzzle, but not a difficult one, if approached with patience. Poirot's gaze settled on the corner of the Persian rug. A corner lifted ever so slightly. as though moved and replaced in haste. He crouched, lifting it carefully. Beneath the rug lay a faint indentation on the wooden floor, a square shape roughly the size of a small lockbox. "Something was kept here," Poirot murmured. "Something important, something that is now missing." Graves swore under his breath. So the killer took it. "And left no trace except absence," Poirot replied softly. "Absence, Inspector, can be the loudest clue of all." Poirot stood and walked to the window. Frost traced delicate patterns across the glass. He touched it lightly with his gloved finger. "No prints," he murmured, "and yet Charles Harrowmont was wearing gloves. Why would a man wear gloves while going through paperwork? Unless—" Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Unless the killer placed them upon him, to avoid revealing the absence of fingerprints." Graves looked uneasy. "You think the killer staged every detail?" Poirot tapped his cane on the floor. "I think the killer is meticulous, but even the meticulous leave patterns." He turned once more to the desk, focusing now on the chair. One leg bore a faint scuff mark. Fresh, the wood lighter beneath the scrape. Poirot crouched again, examining it. "Inspector, look closely. A scuff of this nature results from abrupt movement. Someone pulled this chair violently." Graves frowned. "A struggle, then?" "No," Poirot replied. "The struggle occurred after death, to reposition the body in the chair." Poirot stood, adjusting his cuffs, his expression calm but charged with certainty. "Charles Harrowmont did not die sitting," he said. "He died standing, or perhaps kneeling, before being placed here." Graves looked stunned. Why would someone stage all that? "To control the narrative," Poirot said simply, "to shape the investigation and to delay discovery." Poirot walked toward the fireplace, where a small metal grate full of ash sat untouched since the night before. But something glinted faintly among the grey remains. Poirot knelt, retrieving it delicately with the tip of a letter opener. A metal clasp, decorative, elegant, with a tiny fragment of midnight blue attached. Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, a companion piece to our silk fragment." Graves inhaled sharply. "So the killer burned part of their garment." "Oui, Inspector, but they did not burn all." Poirot placed the clasp into an evidence envelope. Fire is a poor eraser when panic guides the hand. He stood surveying the study one final time. "He knew," Poirot whispered, echoing the message from the hidden envelope. "And now I must know what he knew." With that, he left the study, the cold air of the room lingering on his skin like an echo of the truth, not yet revealed, but drawing nearer with every step. Chapter 6. Echoes in the Hallway. The afternoon sun dipped behind thick clouds as Hercule Poirot made his way toward the grand hallway, its high ceilings echoing with a quiet tension that seemed to press against the estate like an encroaching storm. Though the house bustled faintly with servants attempting to restore order, the atmosphere remained fractured. Each footstep, each whisper, each distant clatter of porcelain sounded louder than usual, as though the very walls were listening. Poirot paused beneath the great chandelier, which cast a fractured glow across his polished shoes. He sensed movement behind him, soft, quick, and hesitant. The kind of movement made by someone unsure whether to flee or approach. He turned sharply. Diana Harrowmont stood at the foot of the staircase, hands clasped tightly, her breathing shallow. The girl who had held her composure through grief now looked like someone staring into an abyss. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, voice trembling, "we need to speak." Poirot approached her gently. "Of course, mademoiselle, but you must steady yourself. Panic is the enemy of clarity." She swallowed hard, I overheard something. Something I wasn't meant to. Poirot's eyes brightened. Such things are often of great interest to me. Diana glanced around nervously before pulling him toward a shadowed alcove near the stairs. Earlier this morning, before you came downstairs, I passed by the guest wing. I heard Sir Reginald speaking to Madame Celeste. They were arguing, heatedly. Poirot's brows rose. About what, precisely? I couldn't make out everything, Diana confessed, but I heard Celeste say, if he found out, we're all ruined. And Sir Reginald replied, keep your head, there's no proof. Poirot's mind hummed like a finely tuned instrument. Curious, he murmured, and yet consistent with what one would expect when secrets begin to loosen. Diana nodded, but her expression shifted to fear. Do you think they killed my father? Poirot laid a compassionate hand on her shoulder. Chérie, the truth is not yet complete, but you have brought me something of great value. Before she could respond, footsteps echoed from the direction of the drawing-room. Heavy, deliberate, and unmistakably brash. Sir Reginald Blake himself emerged, eyes narrowing as he spotted the pair. Poirot, he barked, I must have a word with you. Poirot nodded calmly. Of course, Sir Reginald. Mademoiselle, perhaps you would excuse us. Diana looked reluctant but obeyed, disappearing up the staircase like a whisper fading on the air. Sir Reginald crossed his arms. I hear you've been interrogating guests like criminals. I won't tolerate insinuations. Poirot observed him coolly. I merely seek truth. Then seek it without tarnishing reputations, Blake snapped. Charles was a dear friend. I'll not have you casting suspicion carelessly. Poirot's eyes glimmered. Yet truth does not shy away from discomfort, Sir Reginald. The man's jaw tightened. Poirot could see the sheen of sweat forming near his temple. Anger, yes, but also fear. Tell me, Poirot continued softly, why did you lie about retiring early last night? Blake stiffened. I did no such thing. Ah, Poirot replied with a delicate shrug, but your boots tell a different story. They were damp this morning, and yet last night the grounds were frost-hard. You walked outside some time after midnight. Blake's complexion paled. You snoop through my belongings. I observe, Poirot corrected. A man's shoes reveal more than he wishes. Why were you outside? Blake's throat bobbed. I needed air, that's all. Poirot tilted his head. Or perhaps you were disposing of something. Blake's eyes flashed with fury. Careful, Poirot. Très bien, Poirot replied mildly. For now, we leave it. He turned as if dismissing the matter, though the truth had already carved itself into his deductions. As Blake stormed away, Poirot resumed his path, down the hallway. He reflected on the pieces forming around him, each held by someone attempting to guard their own corner of darkness. But the more tightly secrets were held, the brighter they seemed to shine through the cracks. He was about to ascend the staircase when a sudden commotion erupted near the eastern corridor. A faint crash, followed by hurried footsteps. Poirot spun and immediately followed the sound. He found Arthur Whitcomb standing near a toppled vase, face pale, breath unsteady. Poirot! Whitcomb stammered. I'm sorry, I didn't mean— Calm yourself, monsieur, Poirot said gently. Accidents happen, but you seem unsettled. Whitcomb's hands shook visibly. I remembered something Charles told me 2 weeks ago. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Go on. He said if anything happened to him, I should look for a message. Whitcomb swallowed. A message hidden in the estate. Poirot leaned in. Where? I don't know. He never told me. Only that it would be where truth meets tradition. I didn't understand then, I still don't." Poirot tapped his chin. A riddle, and Charles Harrowmont was a man who enjoyed riddles. Whitcomb nodded miserably. "Do you think he knew he was in danger?" Poirot answered softly. "He knew someone feared his discovery. That is enough." Whitcomb's eyes glistened with guilt. "Poirot, I should have said this earlier. I'm sorry." Poirot placed a reassuring hand on the man's arm. "Courage, monsieur. The truth must be allowed to breathe." As Whitcomb hurried away, Poirot remained still. The puzzle pieces were aligning. He knows. The missing lockbox. The silk burned in haste. The clandestine argument. The riddle left as a safeguard. Poirot's gaze drifted to the large portrait of the Harrowmont ancestors at the end of the corridor. Stern faces presiding over centuries of family legacy. "Where truth meets tradition," Poirot whispered. His eyes widened. The ancestral gallery. A perfect hiding place for a message. Poirot turned sharply, his cane echoing in confident strides. The next clue awaited, hidden not in the shadows but in plain sight among the faces of the past. Chapter 7. The Gallery of Silent Witnesses. The ancestral gallery stretched before Hercule Poirot like a corridor of frozen judgment. Its tall portraits looming in a silent procession of aristocratic faces. Candle sconces cast long shadows across the crimson carpet. And each face, stern, proud, hollow-eyed, seemed to watch him with a knowing stillness, as if guarding secrets no mortal should ever disturb. Poirot closed the heavy oak door behind him with a soft click. Here, away from the murmurs of frightened guests and the artificial bustle of household staff, he could think clearly. Each room in the estate had offered fragments of truth, but this gallery, this shrine to tradition, might hold the one fragment left, Jowl, the man who sensed his own end. Poirot moved slowly down the corridor, examining each portrait with meticulous scrutiny. He noted the brushstrokes, the gilded frames, the mottled corners where time had begun to eat at varnish. On the surface, nothing appeared altered. But Poirot had learned long ago that secrets rarely hid in the open frame. They hid in the small irregularities, the faintest divergence from order. Halfway down the gallery, he paused at a painting of Lord Sebastian Harrowmont, a distant ancestor known for his rigid notions of honour. Unlike the others, his portrait was slightly off-centre, as though it had been lifted and replaced in haste. Poirot stepped closer. "The alignment," he murmured, tilting his head. "A detail so small one might overlook it, unless, of course, one is looking for the most minute disturbance." He ran his fingertips along the bottom of the frame. A faint smear of fresh dust on the left. None on the right. Poirot smiled. "Ah, someone touched this recently." With a gentle but firm tug, he lifted the portrait from the wall. Behind it lay a shallow recess. Inside sat a small leather envelope, worn at the edges, sealed with a wax imprint of the Harrowmont crest. Poirot's heart thumped lightly, not in excitement, but in confirmation. Charles Harrowmont had indeed left something behind. He carried the envelope to the nearby window, letting the thin winter light reveal the faint scratches along the wax seal. Scratches indicating someone had attempted to open it but failed. Poirot raised an eyebrow. So the murderer knew of this hiding place, but not soon enough. He broke the seal. Inside lay a single folded sheet of parchment. On it, in Charles Harrowmont's steady handwriting, were only 4 lines. "The truth they buried is older than my name. Find the one who fears the ink that binds the flame." Poirot read the lines twice, thrice. "A riddle within a warning," he whispered. "But flame and ink! Ah, Charles, you were always a poet at heart." Before he could ponder further, Footsteps echoed outside the gallery door, swift, light, and deliberate. Someone was approaching. Poirot tucked the parchment into his coat just as the door creaked open. Madame Celeste entered, her silk gown whispering across the floor. Her eyes widened when she saw the portrait slightly ajar. "Monsieur Poirot, what have you discovered?" Poirot gave a polite bow. "Only what was meant to be found." She stepped closer, her expression a mix of fascination and fear. "This gallery unnerves me. These paintings, they always felt like they judged me." Poirot observed her carefully. "Guilt, madame, often lends face to objects that do not judge." She stiffened. "I feel no guilt." Poirot smiled faintly. "Then perhaps you feel fear." She turned sharply, facing the window. "This house is full of whispers. Charles knew things he shouldn't have, that is all." Poirot's voice softened. "You argued with Sir Reginald last night." Celeste froze. Her hand gripped the folds of her gown. "You heard?" "Someone did," Poirot replied. "The subject of the argument?" She hesitated, then whispered, "It was nothing. Old business, old mistakes." Poirot's eyes glinted. "Madame, nothing that provokes fear is ever truly old." Celeste met his gaze, her composure cracking. "Fine. Charles discovered something Reginald and I were involved in years ago. He threatened to reveal it if we didn't come clean." Poirot tilted his head slowly. "A scandal?" "Worse," she breathed. "A forgery." Poirot felt a spark of understanding ignite. Forged documents, forged signatures, forged ink. She looked startled. "How did you—" Poirot did not answer. Instead he asked, "Who else knew of this old forgery?" "No one," Celeste insisted. "Only Charles. He was furious. He said the truth would burn its way out eventually." Poirot repeated the word softly. "Burn. Yes, flame." Celeste stared at him, confused. "You think Charles died because of that old mistake?" Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. "It is possible, but I do not yet suspect you." She closed her eyes, relief spilling across her face. "Thank you," Poirot continued, "but I do suspect someone who feared the consequences of the truth, someone willing to kill to protect their past." Celeste's eyes snapped open. "Reginald! I do not accuse without proof." "And you will find it," she said, voice trembling, "because whoever killed Charles is still watching us." Before Poirot could respond, the gallery door slammed somewhere behind them. Loud, violent, echoing. Poirot spun, but no one stood there. Only silence and the heavy presence of ancestral eyes staring down at him. Celeste clutched her necklace in terror. "Someone was listening!" Poirot stepped cautiously toward the doorway. The hallway beyond was empty, but the air was disturbed, like a space recently occupied. "They know," Poirot whispered. "They know I found the message." He turned back to Celeste. "Madame, return to your room, lock the door, and trust no one." She nodded shakily and hurried away. Poirot remained alone in the gallery, surrounded by centuries of Harrowmont legacy, and one secret that had already claimed a life. He retrieved the parchment again, reading the final line. "Find the one who fears the ink that binds the flame." Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ink, forgery, burned silk, midnight walks, fear. He knew what the next step would be. Someone in this house had already tried to destroy evidence and failed, and Poirot would now find exactly what they feared. Chapter 8. The fire in the study. Poirot entered Sir Reginald Harrowmont's study with the quiet certainty of a man following a scent, invisible to all others. The room smelled faintly of tobacco, old paper, and something sharper, something bitter, chemical, and scorched. The curtains were half drawn. letting in a winter-grey light that made the dust motes dance like restless spirits. A fireplace dominated the far wall, its embers still faintly aglow, as though it had recently devoured more than mere logs. Poirot's nostrils flared. The scent of burned linen and singed paper lingered unmistakably. Someone had tried to destroy evidence. Someone had panicked. He stepped toward the hearth, crouching to examine the ashes. Mixed among the charred remnants were curled fragments of parchment, edges blackened, centers still faintly legible. A line of ink here, a broken serif of a letter there. Poirot lifted a charred scrap with the tip of a silver fire prod and placed it gently on the stone ledge. He leaned close. The ink was brownish, not the usual black, something older. Something historically significant. The forgery Celeste had spoken of, or the attempt to erase it. A desperate act, mon ami, Poirot whispered to the empty room. And desperation! Ah, it is the enemy of the clever criminal. As he stood, the study door opened abruptly, revealing Sir Reginald himself. His expression tightened when he saw Poirot by the fireplace. He strode forward, his voice booming. "Poirot! What are you doing in my private study?" Poirot responded calmly, "I go where the truth points me, Sir Reginald, and today it points here." Reginald's jaw clenched. He cast a quick glance at the fireplace, too quick, too telling. Poirot noticed. "This is an investigation," Reginald snapped. "You don't simply barge into rooms." Poirot folded his arms neatly. "But someone did barge in here. Very recently, in fact. They lit a fire and tried to burn documents. Documents connected to Charles's death." Reginald's face drained of colour. "Nonsense." Poirot gestured delicately toward the ashes. "Then perhaps you can explain the fragments of parchment. They are not from this century. And I believe you know exactly where they came from." Reginald stepped back, struggling to regain composure. Whatever Charles found, he misunderstood. He always had a flair for drama. Poirot took a step closer. "He found a forged document, did he not? One that implicated you. One that you and Madame Celeste created years ago." The baronet's eyes flashed with something between fury and fear. "Celeste told you." "She told me enough," Poirot replied. "But she did not tell me why you feared Charles discovering the truth." Reginald turned away, staring out the window. The frost on the glass looked like jagged cracks in a mirror. Charles wanted to use it against me, to force me to confess past mistakes. He said our family had lived long enough with lies buried in its walls. Poirot raised an eyebrow, "And for that, you would commit murder." Reginald spun around. "No, I would never kill my own cousin." Poirot's gaze softened slightly. "I do not say you did, but someone in this house believes the past must remain hidden. Someone who fears the ink of that ancient document, because it binds them to a crime." Reginald sat heavily in a leather armchair, his hands trembling slightly. "Charles threatened to reveal everything, even though it would ruin us all. He said legacy meant nothing when truth was on fire." Poirot noted the phrasing. Fire, burn, ink, the riddle whispered again in his thoughts. "Tell me," Poirot said gently, "where was this forged document kept?" Reginald hesitated. "Locked in the family archive. Only Charles and I had the key. And yet someone else attempted to remove it and burn it." Poirot's voice dropped to a precise whisper. "How did they get the key?" Reginald swallowed hard. "I lost it last night. I assumed I had misplaced it. I did not think—" Poirot finished the sentence for him. "You did not think someone stole it." Reginald's silence confirmed everything. Before Poirot could press further, the study door creaked again. This time, Eleanor Harrowmont entered. Her complexion was pale, her hands clasped nervously. She glanced between Poirot and Reginald with wide, uncertain eyes. "Is something wrong?" she asked softly. Poirot observed her carefully. Her expression was strained, her breath shallow, yet her gaze flicked toward the fireplace with unmistakable recognition. Poirot noticed the slight tremble of her fingers, the tremble of fear, or guilt. "Madame Eleanor," Poirot said smoothly, "were you in the study earlier?" She blinked rapidly. "Me? No. I've been with Lady Marsh in the conservatory." Poirot tilted his head. "I did not mention when earlier." Her lips parted, but no words came. Reginald rose. "Eleanor, what is he implying?" She looked cornered, brittle as glass under strain. "I don't know. I've done nothing wrong." Poirot stepped toward her gently. "Then you will not mind answering one small question." He lifted the charred fragment of parchment. "Have you seen this before?" Her eyes widened, not at the paper, but at the ink. The brownish ink. The ink older than any living Harrowmont. Her breath stuttered. Poirot saw it. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. Poirot's voice was velvet. "In this very room, madame. Someone burned the document to hide the truth. A truth Charles uncovered, a truth he died for." Eleanor stepped back, pressing her hand to her mouth. Reginald stared at her. "Eleanor, what do you know?" She shook her head violently, but Poirot had already seen enough. Her fear was not of exposure. Her fear was of recognition. She knew the document, she knew the forgery, she knew the ink. And she had tried, foolishly, to burn it, believing it would end everything. Poirot spoke softly, gravely. "Madame, the truth is already burning its way out. Better to speak before the flames consume more than paper." Eleanor stood, trembling, eyes glistening with desperate, silent dread. Then, before either man could move, she turned and fled the room, running down the corridor as though chased by ghosts older than time. Reginald stared after her stunned. "Poirot, what does this mean?" Poirot looked down at the charred parchment, then at the dying embers in the fireplace. "It means, Sir Reginald," he said quietly, "that someone in this house fears the past more than the gallows." And Poirot intended to find precisely who. Chapter 9. The confession in the dark night descended upon Harrowmont House with a suffocating heaviness, as though the very walls braced themselves for what was coming. Lamps flickered, shadows stretched unnaturally long. The winter wind moaned through the chimneys like a grieving widow. Hercule Poirot sat alone in the dimly lit drawing-room, his small form still, his hands folded, his mind sharper than any blade. Eleanor Harrowmont had fled like a frightened ghost, and Poirot knew she would not have gone far. Desperate people never did. They circled their fears. They returned to the places where guilt was born. And so Poirot waited, listening to the house breathe. A soft creak came from the hallway. Poirot did not turn. "Come in, mademoiselle," he said gently. "You have run enough for one night." Eleanor stepped into the room, her face pale, her eyes rimmed with restless fear. She closed the door behind her. Leaning hard against it, as though the corridor itself threatened to swallow her whole. "How did you know I would come here?" she whispered. Poirot smiled faintly. "Because guilt and truth, they are like twin magnets. They pull one toward the place where confession is possible." Her hands trembled. She moved toward the fireplace, where only faint ashes remained. "I never meant to hurt anyone," she said. "I only wanted to fix a mistake. A mistake from years ago, a mistake Charles discovered. Poirot rose slowly, approaching her with the care one gives to a wounded bird. You attempted to burn the forged document in Sir Reginald's study, did you not? She hesitated, just a heartbeat too long. Then she nodded miserably. I panicked. When Charles confronted me last night, I knew everything would come out. The forgery, the lies, all of it, and it was my fault. Poirot lifted an eyebrow. Your fault, not Sir Reginald's, not Madame Celeste's. Eleanor shook her head. No, Reginald didn't forge anything. Celeste only helped hide it later. But the original act, the original crime, that was mine. Poirot observed her carefully. And what exactly did you forge, madame? She closed her eyes, as though the memory itself pained her. A land deed, signed by an ancestor. I altered the date, only by a few years, to secure a boundary for the estate that the family desperately needed to keep. Without it, we would have lost half of Harrowmont's grounds. I thought it harmless. A small lie for a greater good. Her voice trembled. But Charles found the original deed in the family archive. And he realized what I had done. Poirot spoke softly. So he threatened to reveal the truth. She nodded. Yes. He said the family had lived long enough with shadows at its feet. He wanted everything exposed, even if it meant destroying us. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. You feared ruin, so you attempted to destroy the document before anyone else could. Tears welled in her eyes. I should have confessed years ago, but instead I tried to hide it again. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And yet, madame, that is not enough motive for murder. She stiffened. I didn't kill him. I swear I didn't. I only burned the deed this morning, after he was already dead. Her voice cracked with sincerity. When I saw Charles lying there in the corridor, I thought someone had killed him because of the document. And if anyone found the forgery, I thought they would blame me. Poirot studied her face, searching for deception. He found none. Only fear. Only genuine remorse. He stepped back thoughtfully. Then why did you run earlier when I questioned you? Because I thought you believed I killed him. Her voice was barely a whisper. And because someone else knows about the deed. Someone else has been watching me. I've felt it for days. Poirot leaned in. Who, mademoiselle? Eleanor swallowed. Lady Marsh. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. Lady Marsh. She spoke to you today. Eleanor nodded. She confronted me in the conservatory. She hinted she knew about the forgery. She said Charles had confided in her, but she said it strangely, almost like she was warning me. And when Charles died, I thought, her breath hitched. Poirot completed the thought silently. You thought Lady Marsh feared exposure as well. Before he could press further, a sound interrupted them, a delicate metallic click from the hallway. Poirot turned sharply. Footsteps approached. Slow, heavy, purposeful. The door opened. Lady Genevieve Marsh stood framed in the doorway, draped in midnight blue silk, her expression unreadable. Her eyes, however, glinted with an unsettling sharpness. She closed the door behind her, the latch clicking like a blade being sheathed. My dear Eleanor, she said softly, you should not confide in Poirot so readily. He is quite adept at twisting fear into confession. Poirot stepped forward. Madame Marsh, it appears you know far more about the events of last night than you have indicated. She offered a serene smile. I know only what I observe, and I observe everything. Eleanor shivered. Poirot's voice was cool, precise. Then perhaps you observed Charles's death. Lady Marsh's smile did not waver. Perhaps. Poirot held her gaze. Madame, this is no longer a game. A man is dead. The truth burns brighter each hour, and you stand very close to the flame." Lady Marsh stepped toward the fire, her silhouette casting a long shadow across the room. Charles was a fool. He unearthed things meant to stay buried. He believed truth always triumphs. Her eyes gleamed, but he forgot that truth has a cost. Eleanor gasped. You didn't—" Lady Marsh turned, her voice quiet and dangerous. "I did what was necessary, for the family, for myself, for all of us." Poirot's breath stilled. It was not a confession, yet it was far too close to one. He stepped forward, voice steady. "Madame Marsh, where were you precisely at the hour Charles died?" Lady Marsh smiled a slow, cold smile. "Why, Monsieur Poirot," she said, "I was exactly where a woman must be, when history threatens to destroy everything, close enough to stop it." The room fell into a suffocating silence. Poirot felt the circle tighten. At last, the shadows were speaking, and the truth was nearly within reach. Chapter 10. The Evasive Answer. The great hall of Enderby Estate was shrouded in an eerie calm, as Hercule Poirot summoned all present. Guests and family assembled under the fading light, their faces pale, anxious, and brimming with questions they dared not voice. The servants had been sent away, only the principal witnesses remained. Poirot, small but commanding, stood before the grand staircase, his cane resting lightly against the marble, his eyes scanning each face with precision. Every gaze, every twitch of a hand, every faltering breath was a clue in itself. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, voice deliberate and clear, "the truth has a strange way of presenting itself. It hides in shadows, dances in riddles, and whispers in silences. Yet, as always, it cannot escape the observant eye." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Charles Harriman's death was not accidental. Nor was it a suicide, as some have suggested. It was murder, a crime committed with careful planning, but also with fear. Eyes shifted, glances darting between suspects. Lady Eleanor trembled, hands clasped tightly. Sir Reginald looked as if he might bolt at any moment. Madame Celeste's red lips pressed into a tight line, while Arthur Whitcomb avoided all eye contact, staring at the patterned carpet. And Lady Genevieve Marsh, poised in midnight blue silk, maintained her serene composure. But even she could not fully conceal a flicker of tension in her dark eyes. Poirot lifted a charred fragment of parchment from his coat pocket. These remnants were found burned in Sir Reginald's study. They are part of a forged document, a deed altered years ago. The forgery was known only to a select few. Eleanor Harrowmont, who created it, Madame Celeste, who helped conceal it, and now someone desperate enough to destroy it after Charles discovered its truth. He paced slowly, eyes never leaving the assembly. Charles confronted Eleanor and Madame Celeste first. Eleanor, panicked, attempted to destroy the evidence, but did not strike Charles. Madame Celeste, though complicit in the concealment, did not act violently either. She feared exposure. She feared scandal. Yet the hand that fired the shot, the hand that silenced Charles, was someone else entirely. All eyes widened. Poirot's gaze settled deliberately on Lady Genevieve Marsh. "Madame Marsh." Marsh's lips curved in a faint, controlled smile. "I anticipated this, Monsieur Poirot. You've observed keenly, but how do you prove what you claim?" Poirot tapped his cane on the floor. "Proof lies in pattern and opportunity. You were the only guest with both intimate knowledge of the household secrets and the audacity to manipulate events without raising suspicion. You knew Charles discovered the forgery. You knew Eleanor panicked. You planted the gun, placed the gloves upon his hands, staged the angle to mimic suicide, and you attempted to mislead investigation with subtle hints, false threads, whispers in the hallway. The room held its collective breath. Eleanor gasped softly. "Genevieve, you—" Her voice trailed into silence. Poirot continued, voice calm but piercing. "The silk fragment found near the study window, it belonged to you. The clasp burned in the hearth. That was an attempt to erase your involvement. You followed Charles, monitored reactions, and when opportunity arose, you struck." Marsh's smile faded, her calm faltering. "And you believe you can simply accuse me, without evidence?" Poirot held up the original parchment, unburned and folded within a hidden recess behind the gallery portraits. "You underestimated Charles's foresight. He left this message not just to guide others, but to reveal the pattern to the observant. And I have observed. The riddle you thought clever, the one of ink and flame, spoke directly to your act. You feared exposure, and yet you left fragments to betray you." Her composure cracked entirely. I didn't mean. It was necessary. For the family." Her voice rose, pleading. "Charles would have destroyed everything. The legacy, the reputation, the estate. I acted to protect us." Poirot's eyes softened, but not enough to release judgment. "Madam, protection does not grant the right to murder. You misjudged what one man could withstand, and the consequences are irrevocable." A faint sob from Eleanor broke the tension. Sir Reginald clutched his chest, as if relief and terror wrestled within him. Madame Celeste remained stoic, though her eyes betrayed both shock and a hint of vindication. Arthur Whitcomb slumped in his chair, as if the weight of truth was a physical burden he could barely endure. Poirot stepped closer to Marsh, voice quiet but resolute. "You sought to erase your involvement with fire and deception, but fire, madame, leaves ash. Ash reveals more than you intended, and deception cannot outpace the mind that observes meticulously." Marsh's shoulders sagged. She finally spoke, voice trembling. Yes, it was me. Charles, I did not intend to kill him. Only to scare him, to prevent him from exposing everything." Her words dissolved into sobs. Poirot nodded. "Intent and action, madame, are inseparable in the eyes of justice. The truth has been found. Your evasive answer can no longer hide behind shadows." Inspector Graves entered silently, stepping forward to secure Marsh. "Madame Marsh, you are under arrest for the murder of Charles Harrowmont." As the household exhaled collectively, the tension of days and nights began to lift. Eleanor wept openly, relieved and devastated. Sir Reginald's face showed exhaustion and gratitude. Madame Celeste allowed herself a faint private smile, for her role in concealment had not escalated into murder. Whitcomb merely bowed his head, aware he had witnessed the unraveling of human frailty firsthand. Poirot stood amidst the quiet, observing the interplay of relief and despair. "And now," he murmured softly, more to himself than anyone else, "the shadows have spoken. The evasive answer has been revealed, and the house may finally rest." The estate, once heavy with secrets and suspicion, seemed to exhale alongside its occupants. The flickering lamps cast a gentle glow, the winter wind hushed its mournful song, and the great hall, witness to generations of legacy, stood quietly in the embrace of truth. Poirot, adjusting his cuffs and lifting his chin, spoke one final thought aloud. Justice is not only in the verdict, but in understanding, the weaving of pattern, the unveiling of motive, and the recognition that even the cleverest scheme cannot escape observation. Charles Harrowmont's death has been avenged, and the truth endures. And with that, Hercule Poirot, small in stature yet monumental in intellect, stepped away from the great staircase, leaving Enderby Estate to its new dawn, its shadows at last reconciled with the light.